started. This is a special meeting of the Edgewood Board of Education. Mr. Stiver, roll call please.
Mr. York?
Here.
Mrs. Benjamin?
Here.
Mr. Gabbard?
Here.
Mr. Worley?
Here.
Mrs. Ashcraft?
Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day that you've given us, the chance to do your work once again. We ask that you be with us as we ponder in our hearts tonight things that will make this school district even better for our students as we move forward. We ask for your blessing for those who are sick and those who just need that special blessing that only you can give. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Mrs. Beckett. Item 3 is a discussion, finance of the district and how it impacts future tax levies. Mr. Stiver.
Thank you, Mr. Worley. Last week at the regular board meeting, the board had a discussion about looking at finances, particularly as they relate to levies. And so I put together a hard copy packet for you tonight, rather than put it online. This way you can take notes if you want to. You can keep these. Unfortunately, the people watching it will not be able to see it. However, I will have it posted on our website tomorrow for everyone to see. So there's nothing in here that's confidential. It's all public information. So there's a lot of information in here. I'm not going to go through every page. The back half, I'll just kind of say, is really a copy of, if you look at the back half, it starts with the, it says SFPR, Summary Worksheet Report. All of those pages is what makes up our foundation payment. And you can see the many, many different formulas that we have to track, I have to track, and how everything impacts it. We're not going to go through that tonight. That's a whole training session in itself that I don't think you guys care to have to go through. So put your mind at rest. That's about half of it. So, but going back to the beginning, there is a lot of different demographic information here. And some of you may ask, well, what's this got to do with finances? And really, everything I'm going to talk about tonight, there's that slide, does impact finances one way or another, whether it's through property taxes, through enrollment, which can change class sizes, which can mean teacher increases, and so on and so forth. So it's a lot of interesting information. As I dug this out, I found it to be pretty interesting. And we'll go through this, and then I'll kind of, when I get to the end, we'll actually look at what this means in terms of dollars and cents for our budget. If you have questions as we go along, don't hesitate to stop and ask. Or if you want to take notes and ask at the end, that's entirely okay also. The pages are numbered, so we'll just kind of follow along if we can. So first off, I just kind of listed what the population looks like. It's got it listed from 70, 80, 90, 2000 in the last 10 years also. I thought this was interesting. You can see kind of a big bump in 2010. I'm not sure what may have caused that, but it's got it broken down between the city of Trenton, Madison Township, and Wayne Township. And this makes up basically our base as far as Edgewood schools go. And then below that, this is interesting also, are the employment statistics. Now this is, we couldn't get it for the city or the township, so this is for the whole county. But if you look at the labor force, we're very strong as far as people having jobs and being employed. If you go to the next page, it actually shows what the unemployment rates are. And you can see that for the last 5 years, our district, or the county, I'm sorry, unemployment rate has really followed what has been going on in the state as well as the nation. And this, of course, impacts people's ability to pay, not just school tax, but everything. And this typically is reflected when you do have levies, that people are employed or not employed, and it can work in your favor or not. Now, There's been a lot of unemployment, obviously, because of the COVID. That fly is going everywhere. The pandemic. So given that, it actually came down from last year. Recall that was the first, I don't want to say full year, but when it really hit as far as unemployment goes. Last March is when it started. And I think we all probably had family members that were affected by that. 3 of my daughters were all laid off. Unfortunately, they were recalled, but you can see we rebounded here in 21. It does worry me a little bit going forward. I think we're going to see this start to go up again, given the number of people that are being furloughed again because of the pandemic. But we'll remain to see. This was real interesting also, and if you looked at the next numbers there, median household income for City of Trenton residents. And it's interesting how it's grown the last several years. Just 7 or 8 years ago, it was $58,000. Now, the median is not the average. A lot of people get that confused sometimes. We don't know what the average is, but the median just means that, and you can see for 2019, it was $77,739. That means that half of the household incomes are below that, the other half are above it. Like I say, that's not an average, so you just have to be careful how you extrapolate that. But it is significantly higher than it was just 6 years ago. In 2013, you can see it was 58,000, and now it's 78,000. It really started to jump in 16, 17, 18, and 19. You can see we had 8% increase, almost a 7, almost an 8%, and then this past year, or 19, was a little over 6%. So that's a pretty significant increase over those 4 years.
That's what I was going to ask. So the percentage there is a percent increase from the prior year.
From the prior year.
Gotcha.
Not sure what happened in 2015, where it actually went down a little bit. I didn't dig that deep. I was more interested in seeing how we would improve the last 4 years. Again, that's from 2019, so data for 2020 and this year is not available yet. So keep that in mind as we go forward. The next item shows the major employers in the district, and it's no surprise that Miller Brewery Company is the largest employer, and then Edgewood is second. You can see the numbers there, and a lot of people forget that we as a school, not only are we one of the largest employers, we also have the largest restaurant and the largest transportation in the district, all of which translates into dollars and cents as far as having to provide those services to our students, as well as paying our staff. So that's just an interesting note there. And some of these companies are a little bit tight-lipped. I will say that Magno Corporation, as you're aware, we're having an expansion out there that will add, I think, 170 new jobs over the course of 2 or 3 years, as well as Carvana is not in there, Carvana.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to add up to 400 jobs over the next coming years as well. They're a little bit further ahead. I don't know if you've been out there on Kennel Road lately, but they've been moving a lot of dirt and doing a lot of construction out there.
Yeah.
Not so much on Magno, but they just started that. So keep that in mind as we go forward. And then the next information is just the largest taxpayers. This is their real property valuation. It's no surprise that 3 of the top 4 is related to Duke Energy. They have significant presence here in our district, and from a tax standpoint, has really helped the district over the years as far as state solvent. You can see that the second one then is the Rockies Express Pipeline, which went in, gosh, probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe more than that. And but those make and then Miller makes the top 5, and then it drops off considerably after that. But those businesses have been here a long time and continue to have a presence here and contribute a lot of tax dollars. The next one we get into is more related to residences. If you look at the number of building permits, this kind of surprised me a little bit given how much construction we see going on right now. It's got the last 5 years there, and these are based on the number of permits taken out of the county. You can see that we had a high of 1,140 new permits in 2016. Then it started to drop off a little bit. And like I said, with we've got 3 or 4 areas being constructed right now. I'm a little surprised that it wasn't higher.
That is surprising, yeah.
And then you can see what that translates into additional valuation that comes out of the auditor's office that eventually will mean property taxes for the district. Again, that's the most recent we had was 2019.
But if we look at the larger taxpayers, that's their valuation. That doesn't reflect tax abatements.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's not correct, Mr. York, that is not their taxable valuation.
Yeah.
Recall we used to have a abatement with Duke.
Yeah.
That eventually ran out.
Right. And there used to be a warehouse inventory tax as well.
Yes, there did. Property tax, or personal property tax, yes, was phased out over the last probably 7 or 8, 9 years. So that was a huge component of school districts' taxes, where by equipment or inventory would be taxed. That no longer exists. It's just on real property now, the buildings and the land. Next page, page 4. This shows our total valuation in the district. This is comprised of businesses as well as residences. And you can see from 2017 to 2020, we went up a little bit. In 2018, we went up about 5.7%. The next 2 years were very minimal. Notice in 2021, now these are valuations actually based on calendar year 2020 to be collected on these properties in 2021. And you can see the fine print below there. 2020 was what we call a reappraisal year, which means the county auditor, in theory, inspects every property in the district. Your homes, businesses, they do a physical inspection and adjust the valuation at that time. That's why you see a pretty big jump in 2021. Recall, during our discussions last year about property and property values, we were told by the county auditor, expect about an 11% increase in our properties. And you can see that's exactly what happened. Now, that doesn't happen every year, that's only every 6 years. Every 3 years in between that, they have what they call triennial update. What that means is they'll inspect a few businesses or a few, mostly residences in a neighborhood, and extrapolate from that and base it on an estimate. They take a snapshot of a few and then they'll go with that, and that's typically much lower. So that won't happen until 23, and then the next big reappraisal is in 26. And those numbers will be reflected in my forecast as we get into the numbers. Total enrollment, I threw that in there just so you can see that really there hasn't been much increase for the last really 4 or 5 years. We kind of leveled off, and really holding right around 3,800 for the last 5 years, and those numbers are pretty much accurate again this year. And then below that, I know we often hear a lot about open enrollment, and we get asked a lot about open enrollment. And I went ahead and put down the number of students for the last 5 years that we have coming into our district from other school districts. And you can see the numbers have steadily increased. Now, I don't have final numbers for this year yet, so you can see I put it down there. It's an estimate. But you can see we went from 213 in 17 and 18 all the way up to 315 last school year. Conversely, you can see also the number of students leaving has increased also over the years. So what I did was I netted that out to show you what it means in terms of net income to the district. So that bottom line there that says the difference, that's a net plus as far as revenue that hits our general fund. So you can see that in 2017 and 18 it was around 736 positive, and then last year it was 1.2 million, a little over 1.2 million. So I've estimated the same thing for this year, but we won't know until those numbers are crunched out for good. But I think that's the reason I put that in there is because there's also in the new funding formula. I'll get into that in a few minutes. They're going to change the way open enrollment students are funded. Right now, if a student is ours, we count them in our ADM, and we get about 3,000 students for that kid from the state. The other 50% we're supposed to make up with their taxes. It comes up to about the $6,000. The problem with that is below the line is what we call it. When those kids go to the other district, they transfer the full 6,000. So in essence, they're taking the full 6,000 that we, in theory, receive from taxes as well as state foundation. From what I understand, they're no longer going to be counted in your ADM. So when a kid comes to our district, we receive the full 6,000 also. But the formula itself is going to change as to how those kids are accounted for.
Do we have any idea, Randy, on the kids that are going out, or open enrolled or homeschooled?
The number of kids going out, yes, that's the.
What's the breakdown on? That's, you weren't prepared for that. I don't want to throw you a curveball. I'm just curious. Out of the 112, 21, 22, how many are going to another public school or?
Those are all going to another public school.
So there's no homeschool kids?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Those are purely open enrollment, leaving our district to attend
Going
another
somewhere
public
else?
school. Yes.
Where we're losing money.
Yes.
Yeah.
The homeschooling doesn't enter into anything. Obviously, if they're not being educated here, there's a loss of revenue. But
Right.
the other piece, Mr. York, is it's not in here, and we don't have a lot of the students that go to the private schools. There's no money exchanged again. However, in theory, because we're not educating them, there's no funds coming in, and that's all part of that ed choice that you hear a lot about that really isn't impacting us a lot. I'm not sure if it impacts Talawanda much, probably more than us.
Well, when you look at the budget, the state budget proposed that they've increased that amount of money to go like 58 million or something.
Yeah, quite a bit. We looked at it the last couple of years, and it doesn't impact us a whole lot compared to Fairfield or Hamilton, which has, or Middletown has those private schools right there in their backyard. So we're fortunate in that respect. Then I thought I'd take a look at what's happened with our voting the last several years. And first I looked at I wanted to show you what's happened with the bond issues. And I've highlighted in green where those levies have passed. And you can see in 1991, and I wasn't around here, there was a bond issue for new buildings and renovation. And you guys would probably know more what that was for than I remember. It might have been for the 7 Mile Bayback.
I think it was.
Wasn't that around 90 or 91?
And didn't that also build the
connector
building over here, right? The connector, there was a connector to the buildings.
Remodel of Bayback. Middle school?
What was,
The
yeah,
middle
what
school.
the EES, right?
The middle school, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And you can see that was, there were some other bond issues put on the ballot in subsequent years that were not successful as far as passing goes. I should have highlighted the one there on November the 3rd, 98. I missed that. That's my fault. I think that's probably when you added the auditorium and expanded the high school. So that one was approved also. And then, of course, in 2009, the voters approved the construction of the new high school. The reason I bring the bond issues into play is recall, and I think Mr. Worley, you mentioned it at the last meeting, when that bond issue was passed and we were building the new high school, the question kept coming up, how soon will you need a new operating levy? And we were very upfront, very honest, and said, typically it happens within the first couple of years. That was in 2009, and we've not had a new operating levy since then. So I think it's important to remind our voters that we've done a good job, I think, as far as how we spend our money.
I would agree, I think, yeah, because typically it seems like when you move into new buildings like that, you do have an operating levy come up, and so we've been managed through, good management and fiscal responsibility to stay off the ballot for that long. So
we're going on 12 years now, so really happy that we can say that. Then I wanted to look also at the history of our operating levies, which really is what we're here to talk about tonight, the general fund operating. And you can see the history there also. The yellow are renewals that passed, and then the green were new levies at the time. And then everything in between are levies that failed. So you can see in 87 there was a continuing levy approved, and then again in 2001. And then the last time we asked for new money was in 2005. You can see it was an emergency levy at that time, 6.9 mil. And going back to what we just talked about with the bond issue, that's the last time the voters were asked for additional monies. Now, that was an emergency levy, and it was a 5-year levy, so we have renewed it. When we came back to renew it in 2010, 5 years later, we did what we called a substitute levy. Basically a replacement levy. We replaced that emergency with a substitute. The reason we did that, and there'll be some information about the different types of levies here in a few minutes, the emergency levies are a fixed dollar amount. And when it's voted in, that doesn't change for 5 years regardless of what happens with your valuation. The valuation goes up, the millage goes down so that you still only receive the same amount of money. The substitute levy, if you recall, allows for growth. So when you do have growth in a levy valuation, you do receive additional dollars. And so when we renewed that in 2010, we did the replacement substitute levy. You can see there it failed in May of 2010. We had to do a few things to get our finances in order. It did pass in 2010, and we renewed it twice since then, 2015, and then again just last March in 2020. Again, I think it's the confidence the voters have shown us over the years that we have been prudent with the dollars and spending them wisely. Especially in 2020, it was a pandemic, and yet we still had a pretty good turnout and passed it 55 and 45. So I think that bodes well for the district going forward.
Would agree, and I think switching, looking at the substitute levy then allowed us to take advantage of the growth.
Yep.
That we had to generate additional income.
Yep.
Really without having to go to the voters for a new levy, we were able to generate more dollars.
And you'll see that reflected in the property tax. Right, get into that also.
Now, I think there's a really neat story in this history, and somebody slammed me for talking about history one time not too long ago, but
weren't you a history teacher?
Yeah, I was. I still am. But 1989, you see those blank spots in there. The Board of Education agreed with the voters that if you help us at this point, when we get to further down the road, we don't need that money, we're going to give it back to you. And they did that. They held true to that. And Beth Stab was on the board, I'm pretty sure, at that point. And I think that spoke a lot to the trust that the community had in the board and what they were willing to do and say and live up to, which speaks volumes. I wasn't on the board, and I wasn't one of the district leaders at that point, but I think it was very important that the community knows that the board's always done what they said they were going to do.
That's a very good point, Mr. York, and that is a good story to tell, because it kind of all goes together when you're talking about something that's difficult to talk about. I mean, it's a challenge for all districts, not just us, and especially given these times, so it's good to remind people of things like that, Mr. York. It did happen in the past. The next item here kind of shows the different, it's a breakdown of the taxes. This is what you usually see this every March when we approve these rates with the county auditor, and I just thought I would throw them in there to show you what's happened the last several years. And you can see it really hasn't changed a whole lot. The general fund millage, and again, when you see these millage, these numbers, keep in mind that that's not what our voters are paying, because there's a reduction factor that goes in, and you'll see that here in a few minutes. But that would be the full amount, the full rate that a utility company would pay, or a business. But for residences, what I want you to refer to is, if you go back now to Appendix A, which is just a couple slides back, a couple pages back. Looks like this. Your spreadsheet. This one. Yep, that's the one. And this lists those same rates, but it also lists a breakdown of all the schools in the county. Did you find it, Mr. Gabbard?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Thank you.
And this is a great spreadsheet, if you ask me. It shows exactly where we stand with every other school district in the county as far as what our homeowners pay in terms of taxes. And I've got Edgewood highlighted there. Now, this is the first time in years that we weren't the lowest. Hamilton, Fairfield, you'll know, they're a little, if you look to the right, they're a little bit lower. Their homeowner would pay about $26 less at Hamilton and about $60 less at Fairfield. The reason is this past year, they paid off some bonds. So the bond millage is not as high as it used to be. But what I did, I calculated what taxes would be on a $100,000 market value home, which is what the auditor would appraise it at $100,000. Individuals only get taxed at 35% of that. So people need to keep that in mind when they're looking at their taxes. To count, if the auditor says your house is worth $100,000, you're not going to pay taxes on $100,000, only 35% of that. And you're going to pay whatever type of millage is in effect. So what I mentioned on the page before, with that 49 mil, or 40.99 mil for businesses, is not what individuals pay. We're at what we call the 20 mil floor. And without getting into the weeds, I know Mr. York and Mr. Ward have been on here a while. You probably understand that better than some of the others. But as for a lot of the levies, as values go up, that millage gets reduced, like I was talking about earlier. If it's not an emergency levy, if it's a continuing levy, that millage gets reduced so that eventually it gets to 20 mil, and the state legislature says you can't go below 20 mil. And then you can see just about all the districts in this county are at the 20 mil floor, what we call the 20 mil floor. Now, that works out well when your property values go up, because they can't reduce the millage. So in this case, with that increase in the valuation, that would benefit us. And as you go across there, you can also see the substitute levy millage is 5.63 for us. We're 6 mil now for bond issues, for bond levies, and then a permanent improvement fund. So you can see the total effective millage is 34 mil. Now, there are 4 schools in the county that have school income tax. So even though their millage may be lower, when you factor in school income tax, it puts them much higher than us. Now, I just picked an arbitrary number of $50,000. I could have put any number in there, and the positioning isn't going to change. But you can see that Middletown is by far the highest as far as property owners, paying almost $1,500 a year for a $100,000 home, whereas we're only a little over $1,000. And you can see how it decreases as you go down. But that number there, total school income tax and real estate, includes those districts that have school income tax, and then obviously the real estate. And you can see how that number scales down, and then all the way down to the bottom where we're a third from the bottom now. Point is, it's a good value to live in this district when it comes to paying taxes. Whether you're comparing it to Ross or Middletown or whatever, you can see there's quite a bit of difference for a homeowner in our district versus in one of those.
Right. And what you just said has been true, again, historically.
Yes.
It has been true for the last 25 or 30 years.
Yeah, as far back as I have been keeping this.
We have either been, we have never been above the third lowest. We've always either been at the bottom or sometimes third.
That's why I was a little surprised, honestly, with the first of all numbers, but you mentioned the other bonds being paid off.
Yeah, I had to do a little research, and I looked at last year for those 2 schools, and their bond rate was higher. I noticed that some of that dropped off, so that's why they actually sit the lowest.
Yeah, as Mr. York said, I mean, we've been a pretty good value for a long time.
Yep, absolutely. So let's go back then to page 6.
Page 6.
Mr. Fussmaker's did. So, yeah, we're at the bottom of page 6, so you can see how that information translates into the spreadsheet that I just showed you. Yep. Okay, let's get into some state funding now. Page 7. We talked about taxes quite a bit and things that affect the taxes, whether it's population, whether it's valuation, student enrollment, and everything. You can see from this information that historically we run anywhere from 45 to 50% of our funds come from the state, through the state funding. And it's kind of what I talked about when I first started, and scared you all when I said we're going to go through line by line with that state funding formula. All of that back there, the last half translates into the number we receive from get our state funding. So you can do that when you've got nothing else to do. But you can see then, as a percentage of our general fund revenues, the state funding had a low this past year, 46.6%, and in 2018 a high of 49.1%. So basically, what that means is the state looks at this and they basically they think when they go through the formula that we're right around 50%. And what that means is, as I mentioned earlier, even though the basic aid amount for a student is around a little over $6,000, we're responsible for about half that through the taxes. We're responsible for 50%, and they make up the difference through the state funding. Now that's all going to change here shortly, and I'll talk about that here briefly soon, but this just kind of gives you an idea of how we rely pretty heavily on state funding as compared to some of the schools that, in Oakwood, for instance, they may only have 10% state funding, but their tax rates are through the roof. If you ever thought about moving there, you might want to check out their tax rates, because you're going to pay a ton of money in tax rates, property taxes, but that's just the difference in the district. So below that then kind of breaks down a little bit about the sources of income for the last 5 years, you can see, and how our property taxes pretty much stayed the same, but you notice a big jump in 2019. That was the Rocky Mountain Express, I think I'm saying that correctly, recall they paid or they prepaid, so that kind of, and then you can see the following year it dropped. But then last year we were kind of back to where we should be. It actually went up about $1 million from 2018 over those 3 years, so that's part of that increase we're talking about. You can see the state foundation there. Some little increases here and there, but recall that we're funded on a 2-year basis from the biennial budget from the state. And Mr. York, you've been around a long time. I know the state is always playing with that number, and it seems like it's the last thing that gets funded. And a lot of that depends on who's in charge and how much money the state has, and it becomes, in my opinion, more political than anything. But it is what it is, and we just have to deal with it. Then the miscellaneous, is also pretty significant. You can see how that number runs anywhere from 4.8 million to almost 6 million. And so right below that, I just kind of highlighted a few of the things that make that number up. You can see the open enrollment is 1.9 million now. If you go back to that earlier slide about open enrollment, you'll say, well, wait a minute, Randy, that showed 1.2 million. That was the net number. This is revenue only that goes into it, because the other part gets expensed also. As far as the revenue goes, you can see it's about 1.9 million. Excess costs, these are amounts that other districts pay us to educate kids that are either court-placed here and are special needs, or come here through open enrollment and are special needs. So there's that excess cost that those districts are responsible for. And I go through a calculation for both of those, open enrollment as well as court-placed, come up with the amounts, and then it happens through the foundation. They subtract money from us for our kids going out, and they add money for those kids coming in. But you can see it's a pretty sizable dollar. And the number that we typically see going out is right around 300,000. So it actually nets about $500,000, but keep in mind there's a lot of cost also that goes with those children with special needs. So I know that you're very familiar with that. But we're fortunate to have the funding to help with that. The last several years, the Bureau of Workers' Comp has issued a rebate. This past year it was $400,000. I don't count on that every year. That basically tells me they're charging us too much to begin with, but it seems like every year they've got excess dollars to get a refund. And then just a couple other smaller ones. You can see the Adrian Medical Building generates about $212,000 a year, and we've got about 8 more years on that. Preschool tuition a little over $100,000, and then we have a TIF agreement that you guys have signed with the city of Trenton for several of those housing developments that went in. You may even live in one, Jim, that the developers have to pay that. So it's part of the refund we get through the city of Trenton. This next information is just to show you what has happened overall with the general fund. course, we've been watching this through the 5-year forecast. Again, the last 5 years, if you just look at the right, the ending cash balance is really what we're looking at. You can see that we had a high of, we were 13.5 in 17, and we actually bumped up a little bit again in 19 to 13.9 million, but you can see now, because there's been no real big influx of money, that the general fund balance is starting to decrease, as we know it would.
Yep.
So you can see at the end of last year, 21, we're still at an 8.8 million carryover cash. Now, going forward, there's a lot of assumptions and variables that go into this that can change these things overnight. And I'll just mention last year alone, well, 2020, I'm sorry, no, 2019. Seems like it's only been a year from COVID. But recall in May of 2019, the governor communicated to all school districts they were going to see their funding cut those last 2 months. Right. We lost $561,000 just for those 2 months. Obviously, nobody saw that coming. In early March, nobody's even thinking that. So my point is, things can change overnight. We try to stay on top of these things the best we can, but nobody has a crystal ball. So I just wanted to list several of the things that are part of my assumptions and variables. You can see the tax abatements. With RV Nation, we're already receiving that money. That is in full swing now. However, Carvana and Magnolia, you can see the years I anticipate getting those dollars. And they're significant dollars. Just about $200,000 from both companies. And that'll continue for either 6 or 7 years, depending on how long the abatement was. The taxes will continue even after that. But, so you can see that the next couple years, they're a couple years away. Property value updates, I kind of went over that earlier. You can see when the different updates are. State funding. There's a new fair funding formula, and it was part of the new budget that is taking into account many different factors than what you see in the back part of your packet there. And they were supposed to have that out in October this month, along with the formula and an update on what we would be receiving, because I mentioned last month that we still hadn't seen that. Well, I just got a communication last Friday, I believe it was. That's now been delayed until December. So I won't know what our state funding is until then. Now I can extrapolate a little bit, but that's going to kind of put us in a little bit of a time crunch as far as determining where we go from there. So I'm just putting it out there that, you know, maybe they'll get it done earlier. I hope they do, but right now we're just kind of waiting to see. We don't even know what the formula looks like. We have no idea. So that's a big question mark right now.
You won't find out early.
Probably not. Negotiations. Those come up again this coming spring in 2022, so obviously that'll impact things with both groups. Health insurance, we're looking at we had a 7% increase this year. We're looking at a 12% increase in January 2022. And unfortunately, our claims right now are running about 116% above premium. So what that means is we're spending 16% more than, every dollar we're collecting. So that's not a good trend.
Not good.
Federal grants, a lot of talk has been going on the last several months about all the money we're receiving from the federal, through the federal government related to COVID. You can see I listed the 3 there. I'll show you a little bit more detail here soon, but there were 3 acts basically: the CARES Act, the ESSER Act, and the ARP Act. A lot of people just call it COVID money. We kind of refer to it as ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3. And you can see how the amounts vary from $329,000 for the first CARES Act to $1.4 million for the second act, and then $3.2 million for the third act. And all of those have different times when they expire as far as when you have to have the money spent, and that's on my next page here. State grants, we received the last 4 years, last 2 years plus the next 2 years, what we call state wellness and success grants. Those were monies that Governor DeWine apportioned and included those in the budget. So for this year, we're receiving just under $1 million, and for fiscal year 23, a little over $1 million, $1,087,000. So those numbers, again, I'll show you how we're using all of these dollars in the general fund here in a few minutes. New levies, I just have a question mark there. Medical building lease expires in 29. That's somewhere down the road, but nothing to be concerned about right now, but you can see what it generates in terms of dollars. Open enrollment, we talked a lot about that. Could change how we're funded. We'll know soon, hopefully. And then the dividends. And then some unknowns, state cuts in funding. The pandemic was one thing. Housing boom or bust. Who knows? Right now, if you ask most realtors, houses are way overpriced. If any of you, I know none of you have looked to buy a new home, people are buying them sight unseen and paying $10,000, $12,000 more than they're asking, which is crazy. Eventually, that's going to have to correct.
That's got to self-correct, right?
Right. When, we don't know, and what the impact will be, we don't know. Hopefully it's nothing like an 8 and 9 when the housing just completely bottomed out. Loss of jobs due to different things, federal and state government policy changes, changing in funding, stock market crash. Personally, I hope not, but and then additional tax abatements that may come. I know the city of Trenton is trying to develop that property with everything they can, and who knows what's down the road. So I just wanted to show real quickly, because everyone wants to know, well, are we able to use all those state dollars and the federal dollars to just offset our expenses? Yes and no. In some cases we can, like in the student wellness, pretty much we've been able to. Recall the first part of that was used to help build out the primary care facility here, to create the student center there. Student wellness center. Health center, thank you. And then after that, the guidelines allowed us to help offset a portion of our counselors, psychs, nurses, and occupational therapists. So you can see how the entire $3 million that we're going to receive over those 4 years, we have been able to offset salaries and benefits to the tune of $3.1 million, and that's reflected in my budget. So for that state wellness grant, yes, we were able to. On the federal dollars, all of the coronavirus money, and I've actually listed them, the real name, as they technically are referred to, and I won't read all that, but one's the CARES Act, one's the ESSER, or CSSR, and then the ESSER. We refer to them as ESSER 1, 2, and 3. It's the same things I just read on the previous page. And you can see the total of those 3 federal grants is just a little over $5 million. And that started last year and runs all the way through 2024, September of 2024. You can see when they expire. I am able to offset about $2.7 million of that from the general fund, based on the guidelines, plus based on what we needed to spend them on. Pretty much all of $329,000 was offset. None of the $1.4 million is offsetting anything as far as general fund goes. That money was needed to fund all of the computers we bought, the Chromebooks. We bought that huge order of Chromebooks, as well as carts. And then also, we needed to replace the computers for every one of our teachers. So a lot of that went into that. A portion of it will be used by John on facilities. Again, COVID-related improvements, whether it's HVAC, whatever the case may be, roofs, replacing windows. John's all over that. On top of that, John keeps asking me every day how much money he has. Sorry, John. And then part of the $3.2 million also will go towards John, as far as what he needs in terms of facilities go. So you can see I was able to offset about $2.8 million, but the rest of it will go towards new things, or has already, and will continue that. So,
and all those grants had a lifespan, a time
yes.
frame. It had to be spent.
Yep.
Because
yes.
you know it's troublesome to look at what I would consider to be essential workers funded in a grant situation, because you know we can't function without counselors.
Right.
OT and speech part of IEPs. You can't get around that, and you know everybody knows it costs more to have somebody else provide it than it does we do it.
Yep.
Nurses, we have to have those too. So it's a little bit scary to think about that essential personnel being paid by grants.
Yeah, I would have thought for all of this, COVID money, that the government would have allowed us a little bit more leeway in that, because they are essential workers. All of our employees are essential workers, yet they weren't labeled that. I'm not taking away from first responders, obviously, they're in the front lines, but when you get past that, schools are on the front lines, especially given everything we've had to deal with. So they've been a little bit, as each one came out, the guidelines tightened up even more as to how you can use it. The first round, and like Mr. York said, the first round expires in September of 2022, the second round, September 30 of 23, and then the fourth round, September 30 of 24. So they did at least allow us to spread that out over a few years, but as I mentioned, it got a little bit more difficult to be able to supplant what we were already doing with our staff. So that made it a little bit tougher, but I looked at that and talked to other treasurers and feel pretty, and they've all been approved. All of these grants have been approved by the state, the Ohio Department of Education, so I'm confident that there won't be a problem with that. My biggest concern is the federal government will actually have the money to pay us. Because that was in the news once also. So let's go to the financial projections, because I'm sure that's probably what everybody really wants to look at. So if you go back to Appendix B, it's just a couple pages back. It's another spreadsheet. It's right behind the other one I showed you. And let's talk about this. So every May and every October and May, we do a 5-year forecast. And you can see I've gone back and captured all the way really back to 2018 to show just the history of where we've been with the cash balance. And the very bottom line is our cash balance as you look across there. And I mentioned the ending cash balance for last year was 8.8 million, almost 8.9 million, which agrees with what I showed earlier. And you can see that even next year, well, I keep saying next year, the year we're in now,
Current year.
The current year, we're still going to have a pretty healthy carryover balance. But then, starting with 23 and even really 24, you start to see that disappear. And again, a lot of that is because in 24 and 25, you'll see I have to start putting back in those salaries and benefits that I was coding to the student wellness as well as the COVID relief money. Because there's no guarantee that those monies will continue. I'm not expecting them to. Who knows though by then? Again, that's one of those variables. But we can only base this on what we know now. Those expire September of 24, so I have to start putting those back in. As we spend those and they're exhausted, that bucket of money goes away. And I have to bring those back into the general fund. And you can see that if you look down at the personal services, which are salaries, you can see that starts to jump up in 24 and then 25 and so on. So that's where we really start to hit a problem. Now, if you go back up to the taxes, though, you can see that I've got some increases built in there based on when the updates are, and I'm pretty confident those are pretty good numbers. Hopefully, even higher, based on we still have construction going on with residences. But a lot of people think, well, when you see a new house, it's going to bring a lot of money in. It really doesn't, not a single house. Now, when you have multiple houses and multiple developments going on, it does translate into additional dollars. So you can see the property taxes, those are based on historic increases and what I anticipate. Again, information from the county auditor's office and historical difference, or historical data, like Tom had mentioned. So the next line is obviously a very important one, state foundation, or what we call unrestricted state aid. Those dollars mean that we can spend them on anything in the general fund, and we do. You can see there's just a tick up here for this year, very little bump, and then it's flat the rest of the year, because going back to what I said, I don't know what that's going to be yet. I'm just being completely honest with you. I saw projections early on, but I hesitate to put those in right now. It's just, I'm not comfortable putting those numbers in yet. And based on the early projections, we do get a pretty sizable increase the next 2 years. But until I see that, I'm hesitant. So hopefully sooner than later. And then you can see down through there, people are, if you look at this one's kind of cute, I think. If you look at Ohio casino funds, people are going back to the racetrack and hitting the slot machines. You can see it. And these aren't the big 3 casinos that we had in the state. These are related to the horse tracks that they built around the state, and they put in slot machines, and that's the only thing they can have. There's one in Monroe, there's one in Dayton, and there's one in Columbus. The 3 of them I know because my brother races harness horses. So you can see that people are going back and spending their dollars again. We had a slight decrease last year, but our first payment we've already received this year in August, and it was a little over 100,000, so I bumped that back up to 200,000. Again, that doesn't move the needle a whole lot one way or the other, but just thought it was kind of comical that, and I'm sure if we got taxes on beer and cigarettes, that'd be in here also. People love the beer and cigarettes and going to the horse races. Anyway, I digress. Then you can see down there the property tax allocation, which is what we call rollback and homestead. That's if you occupy your own home, you get a reduction factor. It's 12.5%. When you add those two together, the state actually reimburses us for that. So it doesn't cost the homeowner, the state doesn't. So you can see that's about 1.3 million as far as 2026. And then other operating revenue, I kind of talked about that earlier. I've got the open enrollment. So you can see the revenues. Right now, there's not a big increase over the next few years until 26, when we hit another triennial reappraisal update, kind of like we did in 20. We have another one in 26 where we saw the big 11% increase. Hopefully we see that again. That's built into that. So you can see total revenues, though, until we get that number from State Foundation, don't really improve a whole lot until 26.
Yep.
And then obviously the expenditures, again, I'm going to go back to revenues. The only way we can change revenues, increase them, other than factors outside of our control, are through levies. So I just want to keep that in mind. The expenses we do have control over, and we went through that in 2010 when we failed to levy in May. We made some cuts in reaction to that. So that is one thing we'll have to keep in mind going forward. Certainly, I'm not suggesting that, but just there are things down there that we can make changes if we have to, I guess is my point. Fringe benefits, you can see that is the retirement and health insurances, and those are 2 very big numbers. As I mentioned earlier, the health insurance is going to be 12% increase in 22. I kept that at 12% for the next 4 years, just based on what I'm seeing now in our claims history as far as this year's goes. Hopefully we'll start to see some dividends with wellness programs, but as of now we're still, and some of that is obviously COVID. People going to hospitals, people getting tested, people going to doctors more than they normally would. So that can't be helped.
Right.
So as you get down there, you can see how by 25 and then obviously 26 things really start to, and this is kind of a worst case scenario. Again, keep in mind it doesn't have state funding, which even a $300,000, $400,000 bump in state funding next year or this year would translate into quite a bit over the next 5 years. We've never really, we had a little bit of a decrease in 20 from 19, but typically we see some increase in state revenue funding. So that's where we are right now. Now, obviously we didn't come here tonight to make a decision as far as what we're going to do. This was an informational type thing. So if you go back to the previous page, previous 2 pages, I kind of list there just some information on what kind of tax levies are available to schools, again, for information we'll have to address as we go forward. And then also what the dates are for next calendar year. One of the most common is an emergency levy. As I mentioned earlier, if you do have an emergency levy, it's a fixed dollar amount. So the board determines how much we would need to receive on a yearly basis. We send that down to the county auditor. He says, well, here's what it would equate to in terms of millage. And that's what will be on the ballot. It's good for 5 years. When the 5 years are up, you can either renew it as an emergency or just replace it like we did with the substitute levy. You have that option in 5 years. You can only do that for 5 years. You don't have to do 5, but you cannot exceed 5 years. And it is renewable. Current operating levy, which is more typical of what we see, and it's based on a millage. It's kind of the same thing. You know, you look and see, well, what are we going to need in terms of dollars? But it's not a fixed amount. So you still go to the county auditor and say, okay, here's what we'd like to see that first year. But it can have growth because we won't be at the 20 mil floor. However, there will be some reduction. Some of it is, some of it isn't. I know that's getting into the weeds a little bit, and you can do a continuing an operating levy for 5 years, up to 5 years, or make it continuing. Obviously, if it's 5 years, you would have to look at renewing it again in 5 years, or not, depending on your situation. Or you could switch it to an emergency levy. There's a lot of options with that. If you make it continuing, well, then that's what it means. It's continuing. It's there forever. And there, as you look back at that graph I had on the different levies that have happened in the past, you can see some of those were continuing.
Right.
A replacement or substitute levy, it's kind of what it sounds like. That's what we did with the emergency levy in 2005 or 2010. We converted it to a replacement, a substitute levy. That year was the first year substitute levies were an option for schools. They had never been there before. And I know, Mr. Worthy, you were on the board at that time, and it allows for growth.
Right.
And that's why we did it.
Like I said, it's a way to kind of generate additional income as we have growth without having to go back for another levy to the voters.
And when you're in a district where you do have growth, and we have had the last several years, it benefits the district, without putting a burden on your existing taxpayers. It's the new homes being developed. And those again can be up to 5 years, which is what we have typically done with our substitute levy, or you can make them continuing. The next one is something you see every now and then from school districts, but they typically don't have luck passing them. It's called an incremental tax levy. I think Loveland had one last year, and it was outrageous, where it starts off as a certain millage, then the second year it steps up, third year, so you can step it up to 4 years. It can only be 5 years. Those generally don't have a lot of success. People want to know what I'm going to be paying for the next 5 years, not what if.
I'd say that sounds like there would be a lot of uncertainty going in, and I think it's important for us, for the taxpayers, to give as much predictability as we can.
I agree.
If we have to go out and ask for money.
I just threw that out there just to give you the information as to what type of levies are there. And then one of the districts, or one of the top options we talked about earlier with some of the schools in the county is a school income tax. We've discussed that occasionally in the past, not with any real interest. There are 4 schools in the county, and it seems to run by counties. I live in Montgomery County, and I think there's only one district in all of Montgomery County that has a school income tax. They just don't do it. Down here we have 4. Some of the smaller counties, your Darke County, your Mercer County, they all have income tax levies. Simply because they don't have much base as far as tax base. Exactly. You're exactly right. So years ago, it was kind of funny in Oakwood, because I knew the treasurer there. They were going to try to run an income tax levy, and the voters, whose income is very high.
There were 2 of it.
We'll pay 10 more mil property tax than we will on our income. That's how high their income is.
Well,
but it is an option.
The one thing with that too, there are certain types of incomes that are excluded from that, right? I think
yes, and I kind of mentioned that here, that the traditional school income tax counts pretty much all of your, except for Social Security. That's never taxed, but it does tax pensions, and that has a tendency to hurt senior citizens who are retired. So years ago, they came out with a non-traditional, which excludes pensions, and so you have seen some districts. I think their last one may have been that, where that way you can still count on seniors helping you, because their Social Security is not going to be taxed and their pension's not going to be taxed.
Yep. And the property taxes don't go up.
And the property taxes don't go up. So you have a tendency to get a more favorable turnout and outcome from the seniors who no longer have kids here. They might have grandkids, but they're on fixed incomes. And I'm glad that the state did that years ago,
Yeah.
because that was always different. I mean, my parents, they lived in Valley View forever. Theirs was traditional,
Yep.
and it was hard
Oh, that is
to do that. But it is an option. You do have to approve them at 0.25% increments. So you go quarter, half, 7.75, whatever. And it's got to be a specified number of years, or it can be continuing. I know all of Valley Views are continuing. When I was at Carlisle, we passed a 1% continuing. So, but you have options there, and a lot of people think, well, it's based on where you were. You know, it's not. It's where you live. Anybody that lives in a district that has a school income tax, their income is taxed regardless of where they work.
Right.
Versus a city tax, where it's only based on where you live. So, or where you work. So people coming into Trenton, or people that work in Trenton, pay a city tax regardless of where they live. School income tax is just on people who live in that district, reside in that district. The drawback to a school income tax is, and you know, without getting into the weeds, it takes about 1 year and 3/4 before you see full collections. It's just the timing of everything. Because you get quarterly payments, but that first quarter, you're not going to get much, because a lot of people haven't even told their employers yet to start withholding.
Yeah.
Starts to improve a little bit, then the following year, when people file taxes on that first year, a lot of them realize then, oh shoot, I didn't pay any taxes to the state, to the school income tax, because it's done through the state. They catch that up, and then they tell their employer. So then by about the third quarter of that year, you start to see 100% of what you should get.
Yeah.
So there's a lag there that, you know, kind of can create some problems if you're really strapped for cash. So just something that you keep in mind. And then the last thing, I can see everybody like heaven is almost done. I put the election dates for next year. There are no more February elections. Those are no longer a thing of the past. The first election will be May 3rd. It will be a primary election. So there'll be, I would expect, a big turnout for a lot of your candidates who are, you know, your political candidates who go through the primaries. And there's key dates for all of these. There's always the dates that we have to make sure we get things done in time by. You can see that by Friday, January 28th, is the last date to submit to the county auditor for millage certification, whether that's an operating or an emergency. And then just a few short days later, you have to get it submitted to the Board of Elections. So the problem is you can't wait until January 28th to submit to the county auditor and expect to get that back in time for February 2nd. So you have to back up a little bit as far as that date goes, and then you get in probably to a regular board meeting in January would be somewhere around the 24th. So it would be your date that you would submit to the county auditor. Approve that. It takes 2 resolutions.
So that's when you have to have 2 resolutions ready even before you do that. So
Yes.
Yeah,
So you have to allow that first one time to get to the county auditor. And they turn those around pretty quick to get it back, to get it approved to submit to the Board of Elections. And so you can see there the primary election is May 3rd, and then there's a special election on August the 2nd. Same timelines, you can see the dates there. The difference between the two is because May 3rd is a primary, all the districts, all the precincts will be on the ballot, so you share the election costs. If you do a special election in August, we could be the only we could be the only school district that has an issue, and we're going to pay the full election cost, and that can run anywhere from $25,000 to $30,000, versus maybe a few thousand when you're sharing.
And everybody's sharing, yeah.
So that's one of the drawbacks. But if you have no option, that's what you have to do. And then November the 8th, a general election, which will be a big election. It's the midterms for all state and federal, and will probably be a big turnout. It's not a presidential, but it is a midterm, and you typically have a big turnout. So there's things you have to factor in when you consider that. Also, just recall that any calendar year you don't pass a levy, that you're going to lose a whole year of collections. So if you're looking to try to get something started as soon as January 23, we would need to get a levy passed sometime in calendar year 22. Doesn't matter whether it's May, August, or November,
Right.
just sometime during that calendar year. To have it go into effect in January 23, so. That's all I have, and I know that's a lot to take in, but if anybody has any questions, obviously we'll continue to discuss this. Not everything, just the money part.
Yeah, thank you for putting all this together. There's a lot of work here. Couple of thoughts I have, I guess, as I look at this. Looking at our projections, Appendix B, we looked at. I mean, starting next fiscal year, right, 23. We've got a carryover balance, but our expenditures are going to exceed our revenues by about $3 million.
Deficit spending, yes.
Right, so we're in deficit spending starting next fiscal year.
Yes.
Which to me, I think magnifies the need to start looking at what we need to do because, and then that deficit spending just grows.
Yes.
The next couple years. And
exponentially.
Unlike personal households, the school, we cannot operate in a deficit overall. I mean, we can't go out and get a credit card and take care of things, right? Which we're looking at in fiscal year 25. That number. So
yes.
I think it's prudent to start looking now at what we need to do before we get to that point.
I agree.
It's too late.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, waiting will make the millage go up. It would be,
yes.
It would be astronomical to expect to pull us out $8 million in the fiscal 25 with one levy in the millage to generate that much money. So
that's an excellent point. Yeah, if you delay it, it just makes it that much more difficult. The sooner you can do it, the better off. Even when I submit the 5-year forecast, I'll have to have some explanations in there to the state because they'll want to know what we're going to do to address the deficit.
Well, yeah, and as you noted, I mean, our state funding's still not really set, so this gives us a look now. I think if we know that number by December, that'll give us a more refined look to know if we're hopefully better, maybe worse.
Yeah, I'll at the next meeting, I'll get that information to you as far as what the original simulations look like, just so you have that number. I mean, it's a pretty significant number. And when you put that in this year, and it goes up again a bit next year,
right.
That's going to be in there each year. So it will make a huge difference, but like Mr. York said, any delay we do is going to cause that millage to be higher.
Right. Yeah, that's right. It's prudent to act sooner rather than later.
I know it's a lot of information, but like I said, I think all of these factors contribute to either property taxes or the state funding. And there's not a lot of control we have over these factors.
Right.
Just do our best and deal with what we have.
Right. That's all we can do. And try to plan and be as prepared as we can.
But if nothing, I think the two takeaways, if nothing else, is what Mr. York said earlier about back when 1989, when the board told the voters one thing and they held true to that, and did not have to have that levy, as well as the fact that we've not had additional ask for money since 2005, despite the building in high school.
With this, I mean, this is the first time I've been involved with trying to pass a levy. A lot of questions. I've just got a couple of them real quick though.
Sure.
Why would Duke Energy Kentucky be our #1 taxpayer?
That's just their corporate.
Okay.
It seems a little confusing, but that's how it's listed on the tax duplicate. But yeah, they're out of Kentucky with their headquarters. That's why. You'll find that a lot of times. I think Magnode now has been purchased by another company.
Yeah.
I believe.
to Michigan.
Yeah, in Michigan. So if they were listed, you'd see the same thing, Mr. Gabbard. They're actually owned by.
When Duke first started after that property, they were in North Carolina.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, they were.
Another history lesson, sorry.
That's okay. I'm not even sure where Miller Course headquarters are. I don't know if it's out here or not, to be honest with you. I thought it was used to be in Rocky Mountain.
Maybe in Colorado.
Somewhere in Colorado. Do you have any other questions? Yeah.
It don't look like our student enrollment numbers are going up.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like we've leveled off pretty good.
Pretty significantly, yes, we have. Yeah, 2020, we almost got to 3,900, but, and I didn't list anything earlier than 18, but I'm pretty sure we had, some years we were almost close to 4,000.
Yeah, if you go back to before, when we were starting to plan this building, we were at 4,000 or just a little bit over it, and the projection was that we would be at 4,500.
Yep.
Actually,
Already, I think.
Yeah, it was going to be before you built it.
Yeah, that's why we had a lot of space.
Space left over.
Right.
With our,
That Dijon or whatever it was that did the enrollment projections back then, yeah, had us at about 4,500. But obviously that didn't happen.
Again, at that point in our history, we were growing at a faster rate than Minnesota was. But the fall of 2008, or the stock market, whatever, or the housing market crash in 2008 caused a lot of people to move out of the district because
we were one of the highest in the counties as far as vacancies. Yep. Exactly right. And I don't know if the district is getting older. I don't know. It's hard to say. Or, they don't have kids anymore.
On the very first page, City of Trenton, Madison Township, Wayne Township. 1970 to 1980, Madison Township lost 5,000 residents.
Yeah.
Was that a
I had no idea.
redrawing of the township?
I can try and find out. It might have been redistricting.
You almost, I mean, from that point forward, it's been fairly consistent. So you wonder if it wasn't some sort of
Because the street light was Madison, like Townsend or something in that Madison district?
I think so. Yeah, well, if you go over where I'm at in that area, it's still
Yeah,
there,
it's
You
Madison.
get there on Ginger Ridge.
Yeah, it's right, yeah.
That's a pretty significant decrease.
Yeah.
5,000 people, but I'll see what I find out, just
Well,
for information.
and I just have a suggestion before you put this on the website, you better include St. Clair Township. They're not on there?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I don't know if you have it somewhere, but that caught my eye. You better put that before it goes out to the public.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah.
That was for Jones, honest permission.
Yeah, I figured you might have it somewhere, yeah.
Yep.
I will definitely get that.
Okay.
If you have any questions later, you can either email or call, as you go through this.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, obviously everybody's property taxes went up.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
I mean, there's a lot of people that go down and they try to fight it and they say, look, this is this. And,
They appeal it.
I mean, how much could that affect our monies getting from property taxes? Let's say it's going to drop. Property taxes, our property values are going to go down very soon. Really soon. Is that going to affect kind of the money?
Yes. Because of that 20 mil floor for a lot of those levies, that's part of that 20 mil floor. Yep. It will.
Yep. Because our valuation will go down.
Yep. Yeah, Mr. Gabbard, I haven't seen too many appeals from homeowners.
Okay.
I know some people though that the value of their home went up significantly, as well as did their taxes.
And that's when they did the reappraisal, right, and then,
Yes,
back in
the bills
2020.
went out in January.
Right.
Were on the values as of December 31st in 2020, which was the year they did the full appraisal. And you can
And
see
then we'll do that again
that
till
one
26.
slide that had
Right.
the one that has the valuation, the assessed valuation, gosh,
Yeah.
almost $60 million
Mhm.
from 19 to, or from 20 to 21, the evaluation. And that was that 11% increase we were told we would see last year.
Yeah.
But some people's value went up more than 11%. That's the average. So their home could have gone up quite a bit.
And that's the part that's kind of frustrating. There's a lot of unknowns and variables that could, you know, we're looking at this number now, the property values all go down. Suddenly we're faced with a huge drop in revenue that we're not really expecting. Flip side, if they go up, then we're, you know, get more money.
Yeah, which is kind of what happened back in '89.
Yeah.
We saw a huge decrease in valuations. People were leaving their mortgages, you know.
Yep.
In 08.
08, 09,
Yeah.
the housing market crashed.
With that big jump in property taxes, I mean, it just kind of discourages the voter, you know, to vote for a school levy at this point. I mean,
It's hard, I mean, it's a
It's a
hurdle,
tough
there's
sell.
no doubt about it.
It is
It's a
very
hurdle
tough sell.
that you have to get over, no doubt about it, Mr. Gavin.
But is it-
Actually, the state Department of Taxation really was pushing our county auditor to raise it even more. And he kind of had to fight on it and said, no, not, because of the way value homes were selling. It's crazy. And so the state's saying, no, you need a value that was higher. And Roger fought him, and it still had him up about 11%, but they were wanting like 18, 19%. Yeah.
It's gonna crash.
What's leveled off the housing market now?
It's starting to, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you see it in your business too, so.
Well, but some of that isn't true though. If it's not a substitute where we're taking advantage of new growth,
Correct.
we got basically a pie. We're only collecting so much money, right? So values are going up.
Yes.
It's not generating any more.
As reduction.
Right, yeah. Yeah, no, that's, again, thank you, a lot of good information there. It just,
You're welcome.
it kind of worries me when you start looking at next year where deficit spending.
Is there a time frame on the Marconi farm being developed?
Good question, Mr. Gavitt. I have not heard. I was going to check with, last time I checked, I got an email back from Rob, I think is his name.
Likely?
Yeah, it was passed on to him. And he wasn't vague, he just said nothing had been finalized. But the last I heard was, did you hear how many homes there were? Oh gosh, I don't recall now. But there's going to be some business development also from this,
I heard a little
this
bit about
developer.
I believe everything on the road will be commercial.
Yes, and then homes
And the
behind
homes
it.
behind, right?
Yes.
And as far as how high and what price, I haven't heard yet, as far as the homes go.
Are we still averaging 1.2 children per home on average?
That hasn't changed much yet.
Something pretty close to that?
Yeah, we didn't see, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we saw much of an increase in kindergarten this year, maybe even down.
That's some of the grade
Like there was a
Last
huge
time
jump in
it was smaller,
kindergarten. There was a huge jump in the kindergarten that one year.
Yeah.
Is that when we went to all-day kindergarten? Is that the year?
Yes.
Okay.
Probably
We
a
did.
We
correlation.
probably got every
did.
kindergarten from every surrounding area.
Yep.
Yep. But no, the enrollment has pretty much stayed the same.
Okay.
So I don't know if those homes will bring any more kids, but certainly will bring value,
Yep.
both commercial and residential. The one over here right off Wayne Madison that's almost built out now. Not too many.
Looks like it, yeah.
Not too many lots left. One over on,
Across the road far enough.
it becomes Elk Creek, what's that road, north? Where the other housing development is. That's
North Main.
North Miami.
It's about.
That's getting pretty well
It's getting
built
pretty
too.
well built out. Now, they're a little bit higher priced homes.
Yeah.
And then there's one over near Bayback, there's a few in there, but I can't think of the name of that. So the next big one would be the Marconi,
Yep.
but I don't know when.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
A lot of good information.
Good. There'll be a quiz on the back half.
Yeah.
The next meeting?
I'm ready.
8-6, tell me what you see now. No, thanks. Any other questions?
I did
or
that
discussion?
more out of just fun than anything, because it's like, I don't know who sits in a room and come up with these formulas. If you look through some of them, it's crazy. I mean, just makes no sense.
Yeah. That's what we're dealing with, though, right?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Crunch all the numbers, and it comes up with how much we'll receive. So I'm hoping the new one will be less complicated, but we'll see.
Well, we can hope that, right? We'll
Yep.
see. No, I think it just outlines we need to continue to have conversations around this and start thinking about what we need to do. Because, I mean,
Yep.
it's not a matter of if, but when.
Sure.
We're headed down that road.
Yeah, obviously, if I find out anything that would impact any of these, I always make sure you guys are aware of it.
Sure. Great. Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Sure. And I will get this out on the website after I update it with this.
Yeah. I noticed that too, Beth, glad you mentioned
Yeah.
that. Okay. Nothing else on that? We actually are, since we do not have a full board tonight, we're gonna not do item 4, executive session. We're not gonna go back to executive session. So, at this point in time, unless there's any other thing we need to talk about, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mr. Gabbard, second by Mr. York. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. York?
Yes?
Mrs. Benjamin?
Yes.
Mr. Worley?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. Probably would be better for her to have that.
Yeah.